Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are dialing in from. It's a real pleasure to have you all with us on this webinar hosted by WorldPop at the University of Southampton. And this whole discussion today is going to be about the power and potential of gridded population data. We're really excited to be using this as a moment to present to you our new global demographic data set, what we're sort of informally referring to as Global 2. As you will hear many times throughout today's presentation. I'm Jessica Espy. I'm the Deputy Director for Research at WorldPop and Associate Professor in the University of Southampton. And I'm joined by lots of wonderful speakers today. Here they are. I'm going to talk about people's biographies as and when we get to that relevant section, so I won't go through everyone now. But we're going to kick off without further ado with our keynote speaker, who is the Director of WorldPop, Professor Andy Tatum. So Andy is a Professor of Spatial Demography and Epidemiology here at the University of Southampton. And he's interested in how populations, their characteristics and dynamics can be mapped at high resolution, particularly across low and middle income countries, as you're going to hear about today. His research over the last 15 or 20 years has led to pioneering approaches in the use and integration of satellite, survey, cell phone data and census data to map the distribution and movement patterns of populations in reference to looking at things like disease, disasters and other development applications. And as a result of the work that Andy started, he now has a huge number of international collaborations, and as do we as WorldPop as a whole, with national governments, UN agencies, data providers, and a huge range of other partners, many of whom you'll hear from on this in this meeting today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andy. Andy's going to present to us for the first sort of 15 or so minutes on unveiling the future, so a presentation of WorldPop's newest innovative global data set.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, so I'm going to give an overview of this new data set. We'll then have the panel discussion and then a more technical deep dive and Q&A. So to start this going, WorldPop Global 2. Firstly, the very basics of why do we need small area population data. Hopefully you're all familiar with some kind of use of small area population data. It underlies all kinds of governance, health metrics, disaster response, education planning. If we don't know where people are, we're not counting them in decision making. The challenge, of course, is that in many situations that small area data can be available, but at coarse resolution, or it can be outdated, incomplete, inaccurate, or just a combination of all of those across multiple countries and inconsistencies between different data sets. So in WorldPop, we're an applied research group of around 40 staff, and we focus on trying to develop geospatial methods for addressing these types of demographic data problems and gaps, undertaking innovative research to try and empower decision makers to harness the power of is reliable, inclusive and accurate spatial demographic data, ultimately trying to get to a world where everyone everywhere is counted in decision making. And so how we do that is to try and make use of the kind of tidal wave of geospatial data that is coming and has been coming for many years, starting with things like satellite imagery that's getting more and more detailed, but the abilities to be able to use AI, computer vision, machine learning to then extract features from that imagery that are related to how populations distribute themselves on the landscape. So here, computer vision methods to extract buildings. We partner with groups like Google Research, who are doing this across massive scales and multiple time points. We develop methods ourselves to be able to classify those types of buildings into residential or non-residential. There are methods being developed to identify buildings that are damaged. There are data sets on land use and land cover, infrastructure, points of interest, increasingly becoming available, and detailed data on the Earth at night as well that gives indications of the presence of an electrification of areas of the world, as well as mobility patterns from the devices that we all carry with us and the kind of social media use of those devices. And the reason for building these all together is to try and build up a picture of the landscape in the absence of us being able to go and count everyone every single minute of every single day. what we can do is make use of some of these geospatial data sets to build up a picture of the things that are related to how populations distribute themselves on the landscape. And this tends to look more like this, a kind of giant data sandwich, sometimes 100, 200 different layers. And these form one of the key ingredients into our ability to try and estimate populations at small areas. We always need some kind of population data to train and validate our models. But a key ingredient is also then the settlement data to tell us where not to map populations, where do people not live. And then within those areas of settlement, these geospatial covariates help us understand and try and predict the densities of people, the numbers of people within those settlements. And to do that, we utilize the relationships between these covariates and the population data using either statistical or machine learning models to predict populations at grid square scales. Many of you may be familiar more with population data that looks like this, where we have administrative units and counts of populations. But what we're aiming for is this gridded version. So we zoom in here. Counts and estimates of people per 100 by 100 meter grid square. Doesn't mean that we are precisely saying that there are 61 people in this individual grid square, but it gives us that flexibility in the types of estimates to be able to summarize in different ways, to be able to aggregate and to be able to analyze that data in a more consistent way. So in WorldPop, we generally produce two different types of data sets. Firstly, on the national scale, more like a bespoke model design working with governments for a single recent time point, and then the global scale that we're going to talk about in a minute. But just briefly, to give you a flavor of those national data sets, this is something that is taking up an increasing amount of our time supporting and co-developing population data sets with governments, UN agencies around the world for things like filling gaps in national statistics, for supporting health delivery campaigns, and for planning and infrastructure development. This is from Sierra Leone for one of our panelists who can hopefully join us soon. But that's not what we're focused on today. There's a lot more information on our website about the national collaborations. What we're talking about today is these global data sets, which are consistent data aimed to be multi-temporal and consistent across space and time, and more co-developed with demographic and geospatial data providers. So you may be familiar with the types of global data that we've produced in the past. This is what we call our Global One data set now, which is for each year from 2000 to 2020, age and sex structured, and openly available, and many of you maybe have used it in the past. And it's been used in a range of different applications, from disaster impacts, from measuring exposure to conflict by linking with conflict location data as the basis of denominators for health metrics in things like the DHIS2 health information systems and World Malaria Report, and for things like disease control strategies, identifying where are zero-dose children, COVID transmission models, the demographic basis for those. And you can read more about those types of uses in this impact assessment report that you can find on our website. And so Global One was produced by bringing together census data from around the 2010 round of censuses as our input population data. Of course, now there has been a whole round of new census collections, so these are outdated. We built a whole load of settlement maps from the 2000 to 2020 round. These are, of course, now out of date, but also have been superseded by all the building mapping and the amazing data sets that are available nowadays. Also, we built up a set of covariates to match those time periods. Those are out of date as well. And so this means that a lot of things have now been superseded and outdated. And so this is where we come to Global 2. So this is a basic overview of the process for Global 2, and Maxim later on will go into much more detail on some of the technical details. But we bring in a set of administrative unit counts again, this time bringing in new forms of population data, new demographic models. They feed into a top-down disaggregation into grid squares, informed by a new set of settlement data sets, covariates, and a master grid to produce new gridded estimates. And you can find out, again, a lot more about this through a blog that is now published on our website, and the release statement for the global data that you can also find through our website. So I'll just briefly go through each of these stages to highlight what's new. So we've this time a huge effort and collaboration with many different data providers and assembly of data from different sources, assembled a 2010 round of censuses and 2020 rounds. In those cases of where countries have not had a census in a long time, we're making use of common operational data sets or projections that have been made by organizations like the US Census Bureau. We're then testing different demographic models to fit different trends between those two time points to produce those estimates across the 2015 to 2030 period in collaboration with our colleagues in the Demography and Social Statistics department here. To produce a consistent annual time series that's aligned, in this case, with the World Population Prospects 2024 national data sets. So they will sum up to those official totals. And this is already, so we've started to dig into these types of data sets, giving quite interesting insights, for instance, here of the changing demographics subnationally across Africa. As we see, each one of these dots represents a subnational unit. The population's moving from very young populations into the working age, and then some countries moving into the elderly populations towards the 2030 stage. And more coming on those kinds of insights. Then there's the master grid settlement data and the covariates. So we're bringing together, in this case, both data sets that cover multi-year global mapping of settlement, kind of binary settlement, non-settlement, as well as building footprints. So we're supplementing some of these data sets with locations of building footprints to produce a kind of harmonized set of data, and then feeding those into a built settlement growth model that's been updated and adapted from this previous one using multi-temporal settlement data. So Maxim can give more detail on this, but this gives a visualization of some of those built settlement growth model outputs. The covariates, these were selected based on analysis from Global One, the most predictive of populations, but now updated and described in this preprint that you can access and also available on the WorldPop Hub. You can download all of these 100 by 100 meters matched to a new master grid. Then the disaggregation modeling. So we're going from administrative counts like this, population totals, and we're making use of the set of geospatial data sets that we've assembled. Firstly, we're only going to be predicting into those areas of built settlements. So we need a mask to define where are we mapping populations to. Then we're building up that stack of geospatial data sets. So building footprints, their counts, their densities, heights, volumes, land cover data, things like images of the Earth at night, all can help us inform how we disaggregate those populations from the aggregate scale, learning those relationships using a machine learning model to disaggregate to 100 by 100 meter grid squares. And this is using our random forest model that's been updated, and the code is available there for anyone who wants to download it. And each one of those models produces different types of statistics and outputs. Just an example here in Namibia, where we had inputs from a very recent census. They were much more able to predict the variance in the input data using our set of covariates than we were, for example, Ethiopia, that hasn't had a census for a while. And so this is something to be aware of, different inputs and different limitations and the accuracy of the models. And finally, the outputs. So I'm just going to give a few examples of those outputs. This is Global One. This is the built settlement model. In Global One, we were able to map out these areas in this rural area in black as settlement, but it missed a lot of areas. And in Global 2, by bringing in all of these building footprint-based mapping and the new settlement data sets, we can cover a lot more accurate those areas of human settlement. This helped us then map populations more accurately. So this is from Global 1. You can see there's only one single grid scale cell predicted as being populated in the south there, in the green cell. And actually, there are huge areas here of that are clearly settled residential areas. And in Global 2, we're able to capture those because of our use of these new forms of building and settlement data sets. And just to compare, this is Niamey in Niger. This is how our prediction looked in Global 1, and this is how it looks in Global 2. The use of these new covariates, geospatial data sets, and modeling approaches means that we can do a much better job, much more precise, and capture some of the within settlement variation that we weren't able to in Global 1. We're also able, in this case, to make use of data sets that categorize buildings into commercial, industrial, and residential areas. So this is Southampton, where we are now. In Global 1, we were predicting evenly across the city and even predicting populations in some of the parkland and fields around. In Global 2, because of the precision of the new data sets, we're able to not predict populations in parkland and predict much lower numbers of people in the industrial and commercial areas. And then the time periods as well. So in Global 1, this is an area of southern Romania. We can see Global 1 and Global 2 there in 2015 and then 2020. We are predicting a massive growth in some of these settlements in Global 1. And the reason is because we didn't have any kind of census to anchor things to. And so in Global 2, we have that ability through the 2 time points to anchor our predictions properly and not push populations, assume that there is a huge growth in different areas. So this produces the population outputs that are now available to explore. I would recommend going to this app that has been built on Google Earth Engine to explore some of those data sets yourself. But to keep in mind, there are limitations in these data. They are top-down disaggregations. So whatever aggregate counts feed in, whether it's from a census or estimates, they feed through into the gridded outputs. Each country is modeled separately, so that can lead to some inconsistencies between countries depending on the inputs that we use. And the populations, of course, can be highly uncertain, especially if we are projecting for a long period of a country that hasn't had a census for a long time. And yeah, please see that release statement and think about whether these types of global data are the right for you. And we have a page that you can read through that helps to think about whether these global data are right or the kind of bespoke data that we produce and co-develop with governments is more suitable. So you can access these data in new ways now. And again, Maxim will talk about this later. They're available on the Data Hub. We have this Spatio-Temporal Asset Catalog, FTP. They're on HDX. Soon we will update our demographics portal, and there's also a ways of accessing it through QGIS plugin. So just to highlight what's coming next, there will be continued updates of Global 2 to do things like population density, administrative unit totals. We're thinking about Global 3 already, aiming for annual updates of the time series, including integration of our bottom-up estimates, some population dynamics, getting better at remote rural slum area population mapping. Alongside this, there's a project going on looking at future projections from 2030 up to 2100 with Wellcome and University of Bristol. You can explore that if you search for FuturePop. And there is now a whole range of training and methods data as a byproduct of a lot of the work we do with countries in passing on these methods. So I'll finish there and just acknowledge all the organizations and the entire WorldPop team and other teams around the world that have gone into producing these data. So I'll stop there and hand back to Jess.
Thank you so much, Andy, for that great presentation. You can tell you're a man of precision because you finished that in exactly 20 minutes. So very well done. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope that was a really helpful, I certainly found it highly informative, and I'm in the team, but a really helpful overview of Global 2 and give us a bit more context to what we're going to be talking about now. So we're now going to move for the next sort of 25 minutes or so to a panel discussion with a few other colleagues. I should say in advance, we were expecting the senior statistician or chief statistician from Sierra Leone, Andrew Bob Johnny, to join us, but unfortunately he's had communications challenges. So we have slightly fewer people, but that means we get more time for a rich discussion with our wonderful panel members. So we're joined, in addition to having Andy to answer some questions and join in the discussion now, we're joined by Dr. Sabrina Duran, who's a regional advisor on data and population dynamics in Latin America and the Caribbean with UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund. She's also served as a lecturer on global health and social medicine at Harvard Medical School and has leading expertise on topics of population and development and global health inequalities. So thank you for joining us, Sabrina. We're also joined by Dr. Molly Van Gordon. So Molly is a senior program officer leading the Geospatial Insights portfolio at the Gates Foundation. She's been a long-term supporter of WorldPop, for which we thank her, and her interests include developing data-driven methods with a whole wide range of applications and bringing data science methods to data-sparse environments. She's formerly worked at the Institute for Disease Modelling and at NASA. So we've got some serious breadth of expertise on the panel. So thank you for joining us. So I'm just going to throw some questions at you all. I hope that's okay. And I'm also going to be keeping an eye on our Q&A function. I should say before we start, if anyone on the line, all 350 of you, which is amazing, if anybody wants to raise a question or clarification, you are welcome to put a question or comment in the Q&A. You will, if you look to the top of your MS Teams link, you should see a small icon that says Q&A with a question mark. If you just type your questions in there, we have a team who will be moderating. Where there are questions they can respond to themselves quickly, they may do that. Otherwise, I will keep an eye out and try and put as many questions as I can to our panel members now and later when after Maxim is presented. So keep questions, queries, any thoughts you have coming. So we'll kick off. Andy, so thank you for that great opening presentation. Can you just tell us a little bit more, maybe taking a step back to the sort of more human side of all this, about what really motivated you initially and WorldPop more generally to create these kind of global, comparable, gridded population estimates, and why you think this is something that's sort of new and adding value in what is, you know, as we all know, quite a crowded data space. So what's the sort of big social imperative, and why do you think this adds so much value?
Oh, man, okay, that's a massive question. So yeah, I guess I can go back to where WorldPop all started with working in the Kenyon Medical Research Institute and University of Oxford, and realizing that we'd put a lot of effort into mapping malaria risk and assumed that there would be good population data that was in a format to be able to be linked with that easily, and finding that the data were outdated, they were in an awkward format, and we ended up having to do all kinds of jumping through hoops to be able to link together our estimates of malaria with population data, and that took me down the route of producing gridded estimates and making use of all the kind of innovations that were happening at the time in being able to take satellite imagery and extract features from it. And so things have just grown from there. I guess that we've over the years have come across so many different organizations and people who are making use of these types of geospatial data sets and the advances that can come from bringing different population, satellite, other geospatial data sets together to get insights at a smaller scales and not work at the aggregate level where we often miss the heterogeneities that exist and leaving people behind. And that's really where WorldPop and the global data has grown from. And there's just been from our side at least, an increasing demand for having that data updated and more accurate and more precise. And so we're trying to do that. I know it's never perfect, but hopefully this is a big step forward from what we had available previously.
Thanks, Andy. And I think we can see that really wonderfully well in some of the different landscapes and urban environments you showed us, and how much improvement there's been made. That's, I think, a nice sort of lead on to a question for Sabrina. So Sabrina, you work with UNFPA, and of course are very focused on supporting service delivery and so on. Can you maybe give us some examples of countries or specific programs where you've used WorldPop data or gridded population data like this to support some of your activities?
Oh, absolutely, and thank you so much for that question. I think it's a great question, and I'll answer it in two ways, because I think our work at UNFPA really goes in both ways. But before I do, allow me to congratulate WorldPop, because I think what we've seen, what was just presented, is really, really impressive, and I think it really shows on how well you are synced in on what is needed on the ground, and how much you've also really learned over the experiences over the years since maybe starting out in Kenya. So many congratulations to you all. Okay, going back to the question. So I think we use data sets to support service delivery, and we also strengthen the foundational data systems that these data sets rely on. So if we're starting out with the use, I think a couple of examples. We use WorldPop estimates to map coastal exposure, identifying populations to coast, proximity to coast, and also in low elevation coastal zones, to really support climate adaptation and urban planning. And Andy, I think, showed one of the results from our collaboration as well, where we used WorldPop gridded population data with hazard maps to identify population in Latin America and the Caribbean within hazard zones to earthquakes, hurricanes, and flooding. And so to really estimate who's most at risks. And just to let you know, that is 53 million people in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean that is exposed to those hazards. And so that's kind of demographic intelligence, very granular for disaster risk reduction, and that really feeds into early warning systems and also resilience planning. And now we're also integrating that information with travel time analysis at the national and the regional level to really map access to health services, and then bringing that into the hazard analysis also to really see what are potential impacts if, let's say, flooding occurs on those travel opportunities for individuals to get to services that they really, really need. And so then the second side of my response and how we use it or how we work on it is that we really work on improving the models themselves, because these models, as Andy put in his presentations as well, depend so very much on accurate input data, right? Accurate census data, accurate population projections. And so we really work with the National Statistical Offices to strengthen exactly that: census operations, cartography, population estimates, and subnational estimates. And just to give you an idea on how we integrate those estimates and the processes also in census operations in the region, I think just 3 examples. We support pre-census mapping and workload planning, and we did that together in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic in Brazil within the Grajipope project. We're also integrating it in the census process towards the end, where we've seen omissions, census omissions, and we've done that in Colombia and a couple of countries. And we're also using estimates where censuses do not take place, right? Haiti, the census has been canceled due to crisis, and so we are working together to really create estimates in the absence of. And so I think our work really is not only about using gridded population estimates, but also really closing that loop to support the production of quality data that can then be used as an input to what Andy and WorldPop has just launched today.
Great. Thank you so much, Sabrina. I have to apologise for all the messages pinging in. We've got to figure out how to turn that off if you can hear the noise. Sabrina, okay, great. Sabrina, I was going to say the other thing that, as you were speaking, that I think it's probably worth emphasising, and hopefully we'll dig into in a bit more detail in a bit, is of course with Global 2, there's much better age structured disaggregation and gender-based disaggregation. And I imagine when you're thinking about emergency exposure or risk or anything like that, having that kind of detailed disaggregated data will be very helpful for your planning, will it not?
Oh, absolutely. Having that disaggregation of embedded disaggregation of that, and also the projections that Andy showed, I think are very impressive. So I think that will be very helpful indeed. But I think what's so important for us, and I don't know if that's the next question, but But I think what's so very important for us when we do regional analysis, that's when gridded population estimates become so very useful, right? Because we can do away with national boundaries, and we just have a harmonized data set basically that we can use for regional comparison and for analysis.
Great. Thank you so much, Sabrina. Hopefully we'll get back to that question of sort of the different levels at which this data can be most useful in a minute. I want to turn to Molly. So Molly, thank you again for joining us. The Gates Foundation's been a long-term supporter of WorldPop and our global data products. And maybe we could just start with a simple question of sort of why do you think this is such a core kind of bread and butter area that you should be supporting? And you know, when you're talking to your colleagues internally in the Gates Foundation, how do you explain that this is such a valued product?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fabulous to see the advances with Global 2 on top of Global 1. It's really, really fantastic work. To me, data like this fits in a really important space between census data and survey data, where you build on many sources of data to produce estimates that are more frequent than census data and more geographically extensive than survey data. And those are both really important characteristics of this data, right? That sort of annual cadence of understanding what things look like now and last year and next year gives you a very different platform of information than a census that's every 10 years or every 30 years, or we don't know when the next planned one is. So that becomes a really important component of whether it's planning service delivery, whether it's monitoring and reporting health indicators, whatever the task is, you have to know, in the global health space, you have to know where the people are and how many people there are. And this kind of information fills a really important space in that field. I think it's also a really key component of, we have an environment where financial efficiency is becoming ever more important. And being able to leverage population estimation data, censuses are expensive, surveys are expensive, and this is a, global product, widely available. Being able to leverage that to do the resource planning and to do the delivery and indicator reporting makes a really big difference in this context as well. Those are some of my thoughts on that.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, absolutely. I obviously couldn't agree more. As you were talking, one of the things that did occur to me, it's a shame we don't have our colleague from Sierra Leone on the line, but maybe I can throw this to yourself and to Sabrina. Oh, we've got someone. Is that our colleague from Sierra Leone? Don't know. Apologies. We just had someone try and jump in and I was hoping it might be Andrew Bob Johnny, but perhaps not. So one of the things that I wanted to ask about, and we had a question in advance of this seminar, we received some excellent questions from people registering, so thank you to those who submitted questions in advance. We had a question from colleagues at UNICEF who asked, whilst we see the fundamental sort of value of these data sets for lots of different purposes, we do sometimes encounter, their words, we do sometimes encounter national governments who are a little bit reluctant to use these kind of high resolution gridded products. Molly, you're nodding your head, so maybe I can come to you first. Is that something that you've encountered when the Gates Foundation is, designing programs or service delivery? And why do you think that is?
Population data is inherently political. Anytime that you're talking about data that governs or influences resource allocation, whether it's, how many vaccines you get or, budgetary allocation, whatever that is, it's political. But a key component of that is ownership. And it's one of the things that I really appreciate about WorldPop's work. And, it's not strictly the data sets, right? And, Andy in his overview is treating the data sets, but there's a whole set of work that WorldPop does that really speaks to national engagement and national ownership over like understanding how population estimation modeling works, involvement in that process, doing exchange, knowledge exchange, right? Like all of that kind of work can go a long way in that field of ownership and sort of comfort level or willingness to engage with the data. And the other component of it is that, and it is the case in many different contexts where different population data sets will be used for different applications in the same place, which is just kind of the reality of it. And so, even where world pop data might not be the chosen data set for one purpose, it still might be underlying a significant amount of operations because of the strengths that it has, which I think it's a nuanced point, but it's an important one. And again, depending on the context of what other data are available. Is there anything else I wanted to say about that? No, I mean that's the gist.
Thanks, Molly. No, that's very helpful. And I think for those people on the line who aren't perhaps as familiar with our methods and with Global 1 and now Global 2, it's worth emphasizing, as Andy did say in his presentation, that of course we do use the census data in order to model these estimates. And it is, our aggregate figures are in line with the world population prospects. And so there is very much a sense that we are augmenting and complementing national resources. I think that's an important national estimates, which I think is an important point. I want to steer us on to something that's come up both in the questions online and is something that was raised again in advance, and maybe turn to Andy. So one of the key things that that's come out of your remarks and comments from Sabrina and Molly already is that the key value of these new data appear to be their granularity and their ability to sort of highlight hyperlocal insights. But as you somewhat implied, and as Molly's just implied, there appears to be a bit of a trade-off between having globally comparable data and highly accurate local data. So how have we sort of squared this circle in ensuring that the product is useful for global comparison as well as local planning? I appreciate that's a bit of a thorny question, but if you can attempt to tackle it for us, that would be great.
Yeah, and I don't think we can completely square the circle, and that's the reason why we produce different types of data set, because I guess Molly and Sabrina have covered this, that there are many different uses and purposes of mapping populations and having population data, and in some cases it's incredibly political, and there are certain estimates that need to be used by different agencies across government, and therefore we work with them to align our estimates to match those. But in other cases, there hasn't been a census for decades, and there is a strong need to produce new estimates to reach certain populations for a specific application, and in that case, we may be designing methods to produce census independent estimates. And so, yes, these, as I showed in my slides, we produce generally these two types of outputs, the globally consistent data sets that have seen big uptake when you're looking at global analyses, you're looking at advocacy, you're looking at strategic analysis across countries. When Sabrina mentioned the kind of regional analysis, you can get rid of the borders, you can integrate it with other global data sets. But when you're working with individual countries and we want to see these types of methods used for actually changing decisions and the allocation of resources, then it's so important to co-develop and to work with those countries. And that's where this partnership with UNFPA, with Sabrina and others, has been so valuable over the years to be able to work to collaboratively to support those governments and to ensure that there is an understanding of the methods enough so that those who are using those data sets can be able to argue to their bosses, to the public, why they have taken on these different types of methods. Why they're using these crazy geospatial methods instead of just continuing a straight line projection from a 2010 census. And so that's why, the co-development, the training, the country ownership becomes so important if we are ever going to see these types of approaches used by governments. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. We've had a question online, which I think kind of relates somewhat to what you were just saying, which is about there are a few different global data products out there that are quite complementary and can be used for different purposes. And for example, Jonathan online has asked, I currently use GHSL data to map population density in global cities and was wondering if you could help us to understand when I should use something like GHSL versus WorldPop. I think maybe that's a sort of nice example of a question that we sometimes get about what are the specific applications where you think WorldPop data can be most helpful versus some of the other gooder products that are out there.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because sometimes it's hard to keep up with all the different data sets that are being produced often for different purposes. And I would also point people towards this the PopGrid Data Collaborative that is bringing together these different data providers. There was a nice report produced a while ago that I think you were involved in, actually, compared and looked at those different data sets and identified where one data set was useful and where one data set was more useful for a different application. So I think there's a need to think about, just like we've tried to put on our website, about which is the right data set for me, to think about your application. Are you interested in a single recent time point? Are you interested just in one country? If so, then look into the types of data that go into our global data sets, the types of data that go into other global data sets, and think, are those actually the most reliable and relevant data that could be used? Maybe the input is a census from 10 years ago and we're just making assumptions about a projection when we should be using a bottom-up approach that estimates independent of a census. So I think there's a need to think about how are you going to use these data sets and understand the differences.
Thank you. Sabrina, I'm going to turn to you. We're getting a lot of questions in the Q&A relating to mobility, in the event of conflict or displacement or humanitarian issues. And we're seeing sort of very live situations where populations are on the move. UNFPA obviously works in a lot of these contexts. In a situation like that, where you're having forced evacuation of a large number of people, or a conflict breaks out, as in Ukraine, where we've seen huge displacement, how do you use the WorldPop data for understanding those kinds of situations, and how do you augment it with other kind of on the ground inputs to really understand dynamics in real time?
No, that's a very good question, and it's somewhat hard because I think when we produce estimates to support humanitarian response, we do so prior for preparation, and then we submit. And then in a humanitarian environment, there's so much change going on at the same time, right? So oftentimes the data sets that we have produced and that we're working off of become very fast and very easily outdated. Within the UN, we do work with common operational data sets on population statistics. So these are actually harmonized data sets between the UN that we do use. And those are oftentimes either official stats, or in cases where we don't have them, then we also use WorldPop gridded population estimates. When there is major mobility, these do become outdated, as I mentioned before. And then I think it is up to the teams on the ground to see what kind of additional information can become available that can be then used, but that is then on the spot, basically responses. So that is something where we then still need to partner with other agencies and or with other research institutions, because that data is not necessarily the data that we as UNFPA are working with. And that's, I think, just makes another call for an importance also on partnerships. What I did, if you allow me, what I did want to go back to was the hesitations that you mentioned, because I think we have seen some, and I think it's also understandable, right? It's understandable when it comes to data sources that are not necessarily fully under control of maybe the National Statistical Office, that is produced potentially by others, and that also potentially creates the impression that we can substitute census surveys with models. right? And I think that's why, and you mentioned it as well, that's why the joint collaboration with the national statistics becomes so very important. And I think especially now, and we've seen that in the 2020 census round already, and I think it will not change for 2030, it might even get worse. I think in a time of financial constraints, of societies not necessarily participating in censuses, I think that's where then government institutions or national statistical institutions become somewhat reluctant to, okay, it might be perceived as an alternative, so we don't need to invest in our census. And of course, that is not the case, right? We still need the census for global too as an input, but we need the census because, of course, it is a fundamentally democratic exercise where everybody has the opportunity to really provide their own information about themselves, about their living conditions, about their characteristics. And I think so that's where a little bit of the hesitation comes from. And I think in terms of compromises on where it comes in, I think we engage with different compromises for different kind of purpose in analysis, right? If we want to do global or regional comparative analysis, the comparability, the harmonization of the data sets are very, very valuable. But I think it's equally important that, as I mentioned before, it doesn't recognize the richness of census data, of survey data at the national level, right? Where we do need that kind of buy-in, of that recognition, and also that transparency and accountability that people do engage with national statistical exercises and governments respond based on the information that was provided by themselves. And I think that's just the compromises that we always see, and at different levels than the value of what that data can bring.
Thank you, Sabrina. I'm aware of time, so I'm going to put one more question to all of you, and then we'll turn to our next presenter, who's Maxim Bondarenko, and then hopefully people will stay on the line so we can continue this discussion a little bit in the subsequent Q&A. Molly, I wanted to turn to you. We are 2025. We're 5 years from the SDG target, and we're in a period of acute political uncertainty, economic and social uncertainty, and so on. So turning to a good news story, where do you think this kind of data could perhaps be most catalytic in support of the SDGs? And are there particular sectors or domains where you think these kind of technical innovations could really help ramp up interventions, programs, and so on, and make some demonstrable difference between now and 2030, so in a relatively tight timeline?
Absolutely. I think this comes down to the role of population data, both in planning and in measurement, both of which are critical in the SDG project and the SDG ecosystem. So in order to plan the resource allocation and in order to deliver services, you need information about your population. And there are places with, like the key importance of census data. There are places with very recent, very thorough census data. There are places with less recent, less thorough census data. And so to be able to have a global population data set where you can do the reporting, you can do the planning, allows that participation across the board allows that planning and that reporting across the board in terms of speaking to SDG goals. Certainly, health is the sector that I think a lot about, both because, that's a big part of the Gates Foundation mission, and also because health is just absolutely intrinsically tied to where people are and how many people there are. It goes into things like immunization coverage. It goes into like any of these health indicators. You need the data to be able to see that progress and how it's changing.
Thank you, Molly. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And I should say that the sort of particularly maternal newborn child health has been an area and vaccination coverage that WorldPop's worked in for quite a while. So you can read more about that on our website. Sabrina, a final quick question to you before we turn to our next session, which is you're sitting within a UN agency. Obviously, the UN's going through a big period of reform as we speak. Secretary General's announcing the new reform agenda. Where do you think, sort of technical innovations like this, these new data products could again be most helpful within the UN system to support operational improvements, programmatic improvements, for our largest multilateral institution?
Okay, I try to be as brief as possible. That's a big question, but I think it has great operational and programmatic value for coordination purposes, right? Because I think, as I mentioned before, it provides these harmonized, high resolution, comparable, independent of national boundaries or administrative boundaries estimates. And I think that's very important when we need to cross across borders, when we need to work in areas where administrative boundaries do not necessarily align, or where they don't align with operational and programmatic realities. So I think this means for us better alignment for interventions, joint planning, but also foresight. And I think with point 2, having projections also really allows us to bring this foresight component into it.
Fabulous, thank you. That was a great answer. Andy, final point to you, and it's a question that's come up a few times in the Q&A to do with updates. So what are your plans? I should also say we had a question about this from Bright World Labs in advance of this via the Q&A function in advance. So what are the plans for more frequent temporal updates of the various data sets? In fact, someone has asked, is this something you're going to be updating every year, or are the current estimates fixed until the next major release?
It is definitely something we are planning to update and would like to update every year, the entire time series. Previously we had this one-off project, the kind of global one we finished in 2018. Those estimates went up to 2020, and then we didn't have any capacity to do any kind of updates apart from small country updates until now. But having realized the increasing number of inquiries we get, the increasing number of requests and uses, we are now gearing up to update, to bring in innovations, to try and bring together also those two sides of WorldPop, where we have the census independent estimates and the disaggregation of census or projections. So yes, the aim, as I showed in my slides, is to do annual updates with a whole set of innovations that maybe Maxim can hint at as well in his presentation. So
great, thank you so much, Sabrina, Molly and Andy, for those great comments and remarks. We are now going to move to the second part of this webinar, which is going to be the hands-on discovery section. So I'm going to invite Dr. Maxim Bondarenko, who's the head of the Spatial Data Infrastructure team here at WorldPop, to lead this discussion. His research activities focus on the development of computational architecture for the efficient and rapid production of large high-resolution data sets. He's a keen interest in technology alongside GIS, quantitative spatial analysis, high performance computing and big data. I should say he's been the computational brain behind Global 2 and is probably in dire need of a holiday. But we look forward to hearing from him.
Hi everyone. Andy gave a really good overview of Global 2, so I'm trying very quickly just to highlight some interesting data set we used in Global 2, and as well as to show some new tools in Global 2 were developed for our users to have easy access to our data. But before to highlight all of this, I would like to mention that a major change in Global 2, it was our new master grid. And as you can see on this slide, there is a new extension. And the reason why we decided to build a new master grid is that in the Global 1, we had extension on going from 180 plus to 180 plus. Basically, it was overlapping slightly on 180 meridian. And in Global 2, we fixed this, and now from now on, we're going to use this master grid, which will be consistent across all our products. Also, just to highlight that national boundaries, we used LSIB, latest LSIB, to define boundaries between the countries. And another important aspect in the Global 2, it was a new water mask. We utilized world cover, global land cover, 10-meter resolution, and build a new water mask. Why it's important? Because we tried to make our coastline as more accurate as possible. As you can see on this screen, we try not to mask out any pixels, which is could be like a land, and we defined a rule saying like if the pixel has less than 75% of water, it's a land. If not, we say it's a ocean and basically not a land. And why it's important, if you look on this screen, in the Global 1, we use binary mask of water. And as you can see on this screen, a lot of pixels, which is close to the river, were masked out. But in Global 2, we are using percentage per pixel. So we, in our model, we trying to make it sure that all the pixels, which is where the buildings exist or settlement exist, and less than 75% is water, then it is a settled pixels. So the water mask was updated, and it's also available on our website. Andy already mentioned about a lot of covariates, and I'm not going to go through this. We'll need more time for this. But I would like to highlight it that there is a paper was in a preview and available for you to check any new data sets available on our website. As well as all these covariates is openly available on our website. I would like to stop by a few of these covariates, which I think is quite important, and one of them is settlement layer. In Global 2, we utilized GeoGesL, volume and surface area, and GeoGesL has 4 time points, 2015 up to 2030, 4 time points. But in Global 2, we producing population layer for each year. And therefore, we used build settlement growth model to interpolate the settlement between these 2 time points. We used a method which was developed during Global 1 project, but we did big improvement by integrating the historical development of build surface using world settlement footprint. So on this slide, you can see like just an example how the settlement is growing over time, and in Iraq as well. But we didn't stop on this. So we also, as Andy mentioned, we tried to utilize all other data sets like Microsoft building footprint and Google building footprint. What we noticed that GeoGesL, if you look, we look close and we notice that in some places, as you can see on this screen, there is some buildings were missing in GeoGesL. And what we've done, we combine Microsoft building footprint, Google with GeoGesL to make sure all the pixels where human can be is mapped on our products. And another really important aspect, and Andy mentioned this, that we tried to utilize non-residential. So we try not to map people where like industrial areas or people not living. And we use as well GeoGesL non-residential layer, but we improve this layer utilizing OSM as well. 2 of them is given quite good representation of non-residential areas. And as you can see on this slide, Columbia and OSM give us quite a lot of information about non-residential areas, and this were included in our final layer of non-residential. Another, I think, quite important covariates, and I would like to mention is nighttime lights. But what we found that nighttime lights has quite a lot of places where like kind of abnormal values. And for example, if you look in Iraq, you can see all these places, but in reality, it's just fire flares. And if you look on close by, where is the city, you can see that there is no lights at all. And of course, like when you're using this kind of data sets, it's misleading the model and can produce wrong results. Therefore, in Global 2, what we've done is we utilize global gas flaring data database from World Bank and also global GIS volcanoes of the world. Basically, it's give us locations of all of the volcanoes available in the world and flares. And we used the method outlier removal algorithm developed by DMCP. And this is allow us basically to filter out all these abnormal values. And when we use nighttime lights covariates in our population modeling, it's give us quite more accurate results. And to talk about the future, we're also looking how we could do the same to filter out like solar panels and greenhouses, because this and other objects, because this give also quite high value of reflection. So to summarize, in this release, we have population counts 100 meters, also 1 kilometer per country and globally. And also we produce age and sex. But as well, we just published a few days ago, like population under age of 18, broken down by male and female. Taking the experience from Global 1 and from feedback and queries from our users, we know that a lot of you are interested in population density. That's why we're working on it, and it will be soon. By the end of the year, definitely we will publish these data sets. But we're also like looking for your feedback and trying to understand what kind of data you need in terms of the format and how you would like to see this data. Also, like there is not much time left, but I will try to be very quick with some tools and how people can access our data. Obviously, you can go to our website where you can find all the information and release statement of these new data sets. One thing which is like I will suggest people who is trying to download our data and in a bulk, for example, if somebody wants to download not only one country, but want to download like multiple countries or like the whole year, I would suggest to use FTP. And this is direct link to this release. You can just log in and download in the bulk multiple years or multiple countries. Also, taking the feedback from the Global 1, we noticed that a lot of people were struggling to download age and sex in terms of like it's 60 files for each age group, but you were required to click one of them to download it. In this release, we give the option to user to download the entire data sets. So if you want to download all the age groups for one country, you can just use this button and download entire data sets. But also in Global 2, we introduce WorldPop special temporal asset catalog, Stack. Stack become quite popular platform for disseminating the data, and why some of you already probably use it in the past. But Stack was mainly created for simplified data discovery and access. And with this new release, we also register WorldPop Stack API in the Stack index. So if you would like to find out more about it, you can just go to the Stack website and you will find the link to our Stack API. Stack has a lot of advantages, and one of them is like Stack browser, which you can just surf around and find the data you need with different filter options and the way to download. But the key of the Stack overall is, some of you probably knows, is the Swagger integration. And you can see a description of each endpoint and how to do the search and queries for our data. Also, all these links, if you go, there is a full documentation for each of these endpoints. Also, just to mention, the Stack become really popular, and there is a lot of different tools and packages developed one of them is, I think, quite interesting, is a QGIS plugin, which is you can download it and use it. If you point it out to our Stack API, you will be able to download any datasets from us straight away to QGIS. Along with this, in Wallpop, we're trying to help our users to access our data really an easy way, and that's why we developed and published the Windows-based application, which allow you to browse, view, search, and download the data with just mouse and spending a few minutes, as you can see on this screen. All of this you can find on our GitHub, and what you just need to compile it and use it. In Wallpop, we try to help users to access our data, not just using Windows applications, but also through their script. If somebody using Python or R, for Python, for example, we also published a package which allow you to download the data from our hub. As well, during this project, we try to engage with a lot of different countries, stats offices, and to see how they can produce population layer themselves using their own covariates or censuses, and therefore we published Python version of the PopRef, which could be used to produce population layer. And it's fully parallelized and the full documentation on our GitHub. And on top of this, to make it life easier for our users, we produce QGIS plugin to run top-down, so the user doesn't need to know how to top-down works. What he needs is just input data. So you just specify census and list of the covariates. The covariates could be downloaded from us or his own covariates, and run it inside of the QGIS. The full documentation, and you can find it on our GitHub, but also YouTube. On YouTube, you can find the tutorial and explanation how to use it. I just want to say thank you to the whole team behind this project. It's quite a lot of people were working on it, as well as our team in iSolution and HPC team in Southampton University, which were helping us to crunch this data. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a really great presentation, and as I hope everyone online could see, a huge amount of time and effort's been spent to try and make the data as accessible in different formats as possible. But if you have suggestions on how it could be made more accessible or interoperable, then please do reach out to the Wallpop team. So Maxim, I'm going to jump straight into sort of some of the practical questions that have been coming up for users who want to immediately start sort of running and using the data sets. One simple question that's come up is, for quite a few countries where recent censuses have not been undertaken, or where censuses are not available or very out of date, you're running a model on the basis of an estimate, which is likely to produce quite a lot of substantial uncertainties. And I'm just wondering, how many countries was this a problem for?
Yeah, Elon, if you look for release statement, we also specify like a spreadsheet where you can find the information about the censuses. But mainly, we were using 2 time points of the censuses and did the population projection. Of course, there is a uncertainty for this, and as Andy mentioned, there will be publication describing the methodology behind our projection.
Great, thank you. And one other quick question that either you or Andy might want to respond to, which is a question that's come in from Simon, to say, does the indication that Global One products are outdated mean that regular users of these products in retrospective assessments would need to get Global 2 products to continue with such retrospective work? So the way I understand that question is that it's people who are using Global One data for potentially assessments that are before 2015, in which case one would assume you continue to use Global One. But Andy.
Yeah, it's a great question. We have archived the Global One data so that you can still access it. Obviously, as we've described, there's quite a lot of data and methodological differences that mean that there will be challenges in comparing them. I've already shown you comparisons of the same time period of Global 1 and Global 2, and particularly the difference in the population numbers, because Global 1 is based on a set of census data from around the 2010 period, and then assumptions about projections of how those have gone without any kind of anchoring to an endpoint. And Global 2, now we've brought in the latest census that anchors it to what we know today. Some of those population numbers from Global 1, we realize probably were going too high or too low, and we've adjusted those. So it does make it difficult to be able to do that comparison. It would be nice at some point. At some point, it'd be great to do a full 2000 to 2030 or even longer time series. It's certainly something we'd like to do, but it needs a lot more work on gathering and harmonizing census data, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why in Global 1 we have just normal population counts, but also UN adjusted for a few years. So because some of them is growing too fast.
So that's a good into another question I wanted to ask. So Andy, you alluded to, and Maxim, in your comment just now, you've just referenced the fact that in this new release, some countries, there are 2 time points for subnational census information to better capture the subnational patterns and trends. What are some of the benefits and perhaps the limitations of this approach?
Some of the benefits are pretty clear, I think, in some of those maps I showed, that we're not overshooting, we're not over predicting. Some of the disadvantages are that we are having to sometimes compromise to ensure that we can get comparable data sets. So we may have access to a really detailed census data set down to small units in 2010, and then access to one in 2020 that has slightly bigger units. We have to harmonize, we have to aggregate things together. Mm-hmm. So we sometimes lose spatial detail, and that can have a knock-on effect in maybe estimating lower population densities in cities, for instance, than we did in Global 1. In some cases that's more accurate, in other cases we don't know. Mm-hmm. And this is going to be part of the process now that we are moving to more live and regular updates. We would love to hear from all of you about, where does this look good? Where does it not look good? Where do you have evidence? Are there places where you have access to census data that we did not have access to? We're only a small team, and we're trying to gather the entire world's collections of censuses and estimates across millions of units across 20 mm-hmm. years. So this is where there's partnerships and a collective community building that kind of database can really improve gridded population data for everyone. And again, the kind of PopGrid collaboration between gridded data providers is where I think coming together we can do a lot more as a community mm-hmm. than a small team can do here in Southampton.
Great, thanks, Andy. And nice to see online that there's a colleague, Silvana Zapata, who's referenced the fact that their teams carried out 4 validations in different countries, and they've had really good use for. They've been considered very good for use at different levels of disaggregation for microplanning in public health, and they provide a link to the published article. So thank you for showing that. If anyone else on the line has done any work already, potentially using Global 2 data when it was in beta with HDX, and you want to share those experiences, please put them in the chat. Maxim, I wanted to turn to you about one of the themes that's come up a lot in the questions, and you alluded to quite a bit in your presentation, is around the built settlements, and the fact that we've got a sort of new and improved approach to building settlements using satellite imagery and AI techniques. I just wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the new approach and how you see it adding value to what others, OSM, Google and so on are doing. What's the difference in this approach to some of the others?
Yeah, but first of all, I would like to mention and get back to a previous question, and that's we try to share our tools in open source, and we try to convince our users to run there mm-hmm. And share the feedback to see how we can improve our data. To talk about the settlements, yes, as I mentioned, we utilize GHSL, and the key improvements in Global 2 that we used settlement growth model interpolated between multiple time points, 2015, 2020, 25, 30. But we improved in Global 1. It was developed by my colleague. In Global 2, we improved this method integrating the world settlement footprint historical data. So we were looking back how the settlement were growing, and we trained the model to understand how it should grow based on the population growth. And also, as Andy also mentioned, we combine building footprint, Microsoft building footprint, try to make sure that all the settlement pixels is taken into the account during our modeling.
Great. And a question from Lorenz Wendt at the University of Salzburg is that in the event relating to this, they were to check a specific city and realize that the underlying building footprint data might not be up to date. Would it be possible for them to produce new building footprint data themselves and then to recalculate the population raster using this updated building footprint layer?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what in Maxim's presentation, some of the tools that we're making available now.
This is
exactly. we are handing some of that capabilities over to the wider world.
You will.
All of you. So please, we'd love to hear feedback on can you run the QGIS plugin to be able to produce your own versions. We're happy to receive requests if there's particular applications that are you are really keen to undertake, and maybe we can help. But
just to there is two tools we released, like just Python version. So if somebody really good in Python, they can just use it at Python PopRef and do top down themselves, or easy just QGIS plugin, which is basically a wrapper to this Python package. And what you need is just the input data in terms of the total population and covariates. And for example, you can use your own building footprint as a covariates and try to do top down yourself.
Great, thank you so much. A question online that's come in from Nicole Xiao saying, I use WorldPop data to understand rural development and it's such important work. But the question she has is, does WorldPop benchmark the predicted numbers that we have against alternative small population estimates like surveys, in essence, any estimates aside from the census? Of course, as Andy alluded to, we do a lot of bottom-up work with countries in collaboration using different bits of data provided by the national government in order to do this kind of thing. But at the global level, do you want to reflect on that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's always the trade-off with doing things global. We have to necessarily, as a small team, cut corners and make assumptions about how things work and how people are distributed, and build up as much data as we can, much evidence, much learning as we can. But yes, in some cases I guess we're making use of estimates or projections. Some of the common operational data sets that Sabrina mentioned that the UN produces when the censuses are outdated. But as you mentioned, the bottom-up estimates, if you're interested in a very specific country and a specific time point, those are the ones where we've been able to go into more depth to work and co-develop solutions with countries using data sets that are often not publicly available, but are really detailed and up to date.
Great, thank you so much. There's a question that's coming from Kelly Hellman from the Indigenous Justice Circle, asking about disaggregation and what improvements have been made to support further demographic disaggregation by sex and age and so on. Before I turned to Andy and Maxim to answer that, I also wanted to see if Sabrina and Molly are still available. I know their cameras are off. If there are any specific suggestions you might have, either you want to jump in or you can pop it in the chat, about other disaggregations you think would be helpful, particularly for your work at UNFPA or with the Gates Foundation, just something to reflect on. So turning to you, Andy, what are some of the sort of further demographic disaggregations innovations that we've made in Global 2?
Yeah, so I guess we didn't talk about it so much, but in Global 1, everything was kind of separated. We had a set of subnational census counts, and then we assembled our own set of age and sex structure breakdowns from household surveys, from census microdata. and then just use those to break up the population counts. And that led to all kinds of weird situations and challenges in places where demographics just dropped and changed. This time we tried to bring everything together. So our demographers over in social stats were working on methods that were harmonized, so that those projections were broken down by the age and sex all the way through, and the input data, the census data, were broken down by age and sex. So that's one of the bigger innovations, and you should see a smoother, I guess, the population pyramid changing more smoothly than we had in Global One because of that. We're also looking at ways of breaking and summarizing those age and sex groups down in different ways. So we have the under ones, we have the
under
18s. I think there may be some others that we've had requests for. So again, if you have specific age groups that you are really keen to have, then please let us know. We have methods, and there's also a tool that we worked on with UNESCO, the Sprague multipliers tool that can break things down into individual age years as well. So that's on our website.
Thanks, Andy. And I think, as Maxim just alluded to, saying that we have under 18 data, obviously that means that now there are potentially way more applications about how to use that disaggregated information. So looking, for example, at voting age, different governance scenarios, if you can disaggregate the different age ranges, like under 5, which we've had for a while, but different childhood ages, then of course you can look at different health interventions and so on. So hopefully lots of you online will be feeling inspired to think about different ways you can use that demographic information to understand different dynamics. There are good questions come in from Piet Gerrits online, who says he's doing a PhD at the University of Glasgow, welcome, and says, I look at the use of historical satellite imagery, Hexagon, to improve GHS pop from 1975 to 1990. Are there initiatives for World Pop to do backwards prediction of population? I know that this has been a conversation in the team, so I'm going to invite, Maxim, do you think there's potential for us to do historical analysis?
Yeah, it's everything is possible in this world. There is 2 limitations, time and fundings. But yes, we were talking about it, and we have some ideas. I think Andy will be the best person to
Great.
give the direction.
I can't answer it, but definitely interested, because not only can it produce that past data, but it can help us improve the present day and future data by having a better understanding of how populations are changing. If we can assemble data from the 2000 period and we can understand those changes, we can do a much better job of understanding what are the drivers, what are the patterns that we see, and how might that change in the future.
Great. One more question about a specific type of disaggregation, and then we'll come to a couple of wrapping up remarks. Cheng-Li Huang's on the line from the University of Sheffield and asks, I was curious, have you looked at urban-rural divisions or categorizations at the global scale, given this is an area or a set of boundaries that's often quite controversial? Or is this something you came across while generating the data and preferred to avoid? So how have you tackled the urban-rural difference?
I guess at the moment we don't define urban or rural areas, but we have been working with the JRC on collaborating on the degree of urbanization metric, and how different gridded data sets, how that changes when you use different gridded population data sets. We have a plan in place to implement the degree of urbanization on these data, to provide another form of these data as an output that may be useful to some.
Just the European Commission, they developed this methodology, degree of urbanization, but the input for this is like population. So it's first you produce population, and then you can calculate the degree of urbanization. But in WorldPop, we just recently did a project called degree of urbanization, and the paper was submitted. So if anybody interested to see the different type of the degree of urbanization using different input populations, like WorldPop, GHSL, POP, and I don't remember, and other populations, please have a look, and you will see the different
Great, thank you so much. I want to just quickly go around all four of our great speakers for a final 1 minute remark before we wrap up today's session. So Sabrina, maybe I can turn to you first and just ask, reflecting on everything we've just heard and the questions that have been coming in, what is one area that you would like to see, one avenue or one frontier you would like to see the WorldPop team work on next that might be most useful for your activities?
Ooh, that's a good one. I was reflecting on the other one. Maybe I can weave them in, because I think disaggregations, we have the pillar of the 2030 agenda is leaving no one behind, right? Yep. So for that, we need disaggregations, and we need that by sex and by age, by ethnicity, by disability, and by migration status, and some others. So I think it would be very, very helpful to explore further disaggregations, with a big caveat, because I think self-identification is so very important when it comes to statistical visibility, right? And I think I haven't seen modeling efforts yet where we have, or where you have modeled some politically and socially important data or variables. And I think just exploring that a little bit more would be very, very helpful. I close on that, but I think everything we've seen today is very promising. Congratulations again.
Thank you, Sabrina. That's great. Molly, if I could turn to you again, either or. What do you think would be the most sort of valuable frontier of work that you'd like to see WorldPop working on moving forward? Or is there a particular sort of aspect of disaggregation or horizontal group that you think it would be most useful to look at to support your work?
Yeah, I'll touch on both briefly. On the disaggregation question, one of the conversations that I've been part of recently is the conversation about HPV vaccination, where there's been a lot of work done on under 1, there's been a lot of work done on under 5, but thinking about school age girls, especially when school registry is not always a reliable source of information for the actual underlying population, that is a huge question right now with the rollout of the HPV vaccine. So that would be my response to the disaggregation question. I love the work that WorldPop does, working directly with countries, with country agencies, ministries, departments, agencies. I think it is so transformative to getting the data applied in country in ways that are absolutely pivotal. So that is something that I am very much looking forward to continuing to see move forward.
Thank you so much, Sabrina and Molly. Maxim, final comment and question for you. What is the sort of next thing you're planning to do to try and make all of WorldPop's data more accessible, more open? Are there particular innovations planned to try and increase access? Benjamin Stewart at the World Bank, for example, said, have you considered something like leveraging cloud native geospatial?
Yes, yes. We do, but one update which I didn't mention it is like our API for Global One. We had API where people can access our data. Basically, your user can just submit a shapefile and get aggregated data. Mm-hmm. And for Global 2, we're also working on it and going to release API version 2, where a user can just submit polygon or point location and immediately will get all the information he needs regarding population and age and sex. So this will be done by the end of this year. So keep checking our website for this news and then register to get access to this API.
Fab. Thank you so much, Maxim. And Andy, final question for you and final perhaps reflection as we wrap up this great discussion. What do you think are the next kind of major research frontiers or key policy challenges that you want the team here at WorldPop to try and address?
I guess two areas. And the technical side, we're getting better at mapping populations, but there are still the populations maybe at the extremes of the density spectrum. So the most dense areas, the informal settlements, the slum areas, and then the most remote rural, the nomadic populations, those in really remote rural areas. We still don't do a great job there. And then in terms of other frontiers is getting better at ensuring that the data is used and taken up in decision making. It's like a research area itself in understanding how do governments use data, use this type of data, and how can we design training, how can we build those types of engagements better so that we can actually see it adopted rather than just sitting on a server somewhere.
Great, thank you so much. So all that remains is for me to thank you all for joining us, and particular thanks to the 223 of you who stuck it out for the whole session. We're very grateful. If you have any comments or questions, please keep emailing us. There is a contact sheet. I'm going to quickly share the screen so that you can all see that. So please do join the survey if you have a minute, just to give us your feedback, both on this event, but also on the products available. Please get in touch if you have any comments or questions. I also want to say a huge thank you to Molly and Sabrina for joining us and for dialing in from other parts of the world. Yes, and we hope that you will all be joining us again soon for our next major updates. Thank you once again. Goodbye.